Hello, hello. So I'm here today to talk about the wild women archetype. Now, last week, or maybe it was like a week and a half ago, I don't know. I got a little screwed up over the holidays, but a week and a half ago, I believe, that I started to talk about how to work with archetypes. So today we are going to talk about a very specific archetype, the wild woman archetype. Now, many of the women are in my community are exploring the wild woman archetype through this classic tome of women's wisdom by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And I really believe that we are being called back to the wild woman archetype because I know that anytime I offered this book club, so we're in the middle of it right now, but I'll be offering it again come February, or even do a workshop or a talk on the wild woman archetype, people just resonate to it. And I like to think the one way when we're working with archetypes to know that there's an archetype within us that wants to come out is when we feel pull towards that archetype. So when that word just kind of lights us up. So if we're thinking about a specific type of archetype or quality or energy, that means there's a part of us that wants to be expressed as well. So that's why I think it can be so fun, so powerful to work with archetypes. Now, I just wanted to read a a little bit of a passage from this book that I think is really applicable before we get into the talk today. So she writes, when women hear those words, an old memory is stirred and brought back to life. The memory is of our absolute, undeniable, and irrevocable kinship with the wild feminine, a relationship which may have become ghosty from neglect, buried by over-domestication, outlawed by the surrounding culture, or no longer understood anymore. We may have forgotten her names, we may not answer when she calls ours, but in our bones we know her. We yearn toward her. We know she belongs to us and we to her. So that's the author talking about the wild woman archetype. It's almost an archetype that we can actually feel and experience in our bones. So let's talk about the wild woman archetype today. So what exactly is that? What are the qualities of the archetype? And just to remember, an archetype is a behavior or pattern of energy. So it's almost like an autonomous feeling that we have within us. And Carl Jung would say we are all made up of a collection of archetypes. So if this one resonates with you, that means it's a part of you that wants to come out. Now, the wild woman archetype she's intuitive, she's sensual, she's creative, she's connected with the natural world around her, she's connected with her intuition and the rhythms of her body. So we can think of it as like this primal, divine, feminine energy. And the wild woman is really all about connecting to her own sense of self. So even though she's very sensual and sexual, she's sovereign. She is one unto herself. So she knows what she needs, she knows her desires, and she also sets boundaries as well. So when I think of the wild woman, it's somebody who's not afraid to color outside the lines or walk their own path, even if that is not what society or her family had wanted. But she is in touch with kind of that inner spark that we have about what it is that we want to do, what is our purpose, what is our desires. Now, many of us, what can say, have become over-domesticated. And we can think of that as kind of like people-pleasing, the good girl tendencies, where we go along to get along. We don't really want to rock the boat too much, right? And I think, many of us have that. And then there's often that shift to come back to the wild woman where it's like, I'm going to be doing the things that I want to do. I'm going to start honoring my own desires. And sometimes that can feel like a pendulum, right? Where we kind of go in one direction where maybe we're overly domesticated, but then we swing to the other where we could be overly wild. And what we're really looking to do is kind of cultivate this energy that's really more everlasting, that we always have in sync with us. And there's also the concept of the feral woman. Now, feral means something that was wild, was once domesticated, and then is wild again. But the feral is a little bit out of control. The wild is very much in control. So the author in Women Who Run with the Wolves often draws parallel to the way that wolves live, that they're very in tune with their instincts. They're protective of their cubs. They live in packs. They gather together. So that's really the energy that we're looking to cultivate when we start to think about the wild woman. And I also think the wild woman is very much connected to the cycles of life, right? So when we think of the cycles of life, the divine feminine is so cyclical. I mean, as women, right, we bleed with the moon. We also go through these transitions, whether it's through perimenopause to menopause. We honor this life, death, life cycle. We give birth. We often tend to the die-in. We're connected to the seasons. So it's this very cyclical type of experience that the wild woman is aligned to. And I think that this is just really beautiful, because I think sometimes in our culture, we can forget that we're connected to a much greater whole. But the wild woman knows that she's an integral part of it, that she's not separate from nature, but she's part of it. So she lives part of it. And that's where some of her energy, that's where her power comes from as well, too. Now, that life, death, life cycle is actually also a really big theme in Women Who Run with the Wolves. And that's something that we can really think of the wild woman having a very good grasp on. And what I mean by that is, sometimes as humans, we really like to hold on tight to things, right? Whether it's careers, relationships, our money, whatever it is, but there's a graspiness. But there is a life, death, life cycle that is inherent in everything. Of course, it's inherent. We see it in the seasons. The seasons are such great teachers. There's so much wisdom in the seasons, but we see it in our relationships. We see it in our health. We see it in our careers. So the wild woman is tapped into this deep knowing, this deep understanding that she has to let go. She has to let what needs to die, so there can be rebirth, so something new can come to fruition. So I always like to ponder this inquiry to the women in my community: what in your life needs to die? What needs to be let go? So something new can be birthed to life, so something new can transpire. Because if we're grasping all the time, we're holding on too tightly, and we're not letting that space, that room for new things to be birthed to life. Now, why do we even want to nurture this wild woman archetype? So we've been talking about this archetype for a bit, and I think it's kind of clear why we want to nurture it, because this is our intuitive, it's our sensual, creative selves, right? So when we are tapped into this, we're going to feel more confident, we're going to feel alive, and we're going to be connected to this sense of purpose. And we'll also have healthy boundaries, right? The wild woman knows what it is. And I'm going to give you an example in just a moment of what it is that she desires, because we also can think of our boundaries simply as our preferences. This feels good. This doesn't feel good. I want this. I don't want this, right? We don't even need to overcomplicate it. But the wild woman sets boundaries because she knows what her preferences are. She knows what feels good to her. And she says yes to the things that light her up, and she says no to the things that don't align with her. So when we are tapped into our wild woman, we're less likely to operate from a place of needing validation or the sense of lack, but we're operating from a place of empowerment and creativity and knowing that we have our own back, which I think is just a really beautiful way of thinking of that wild woman archetype. So I wanted to just give an example as well of what would be an example of the wild woman archetype. And I am sure there are many, so if you can think of some, please list them below. But the one that often comes to my mind is Lilith. Now, she's often considered, the dark goddess of feminine powers. But I want to tell you a little bit about Lilith. So according to Hebrew mythology, she was Adam's first wife before Eve, and she and Adam were created equal at the same time. Now, as the story goes, Adam wanted Lilith to submit, so he wanted to be the master. I also heard he always wanted to be on top during sex, but Lilith wasn't having any of that. So think about it here. They were in the Garden of Eden. They had a very idyllic lifestyle, but because Lilith was like, I'm not submitting, we are equals, she decided to leave the Garden of Eden. She left to live wildly, some would even say ferally, out in the forest. And she was demonized. People would say that she was the killer of young babies. So she didn't necessarily choose the easier path, but she chose a path that felt good to her. And Lilith was very much in touch with her sensuality, her sexuality, the rhythms of nature. So we can look at Lilith as kind of this the embodiment of that wild woman. So that's one way we can think of it. So now I know that it's how do I connect with my inner wild woman? Now, I definitely encourage you, if you haven't watched it, I have another talk that I did on how to connect with archetypes. So you can go back and watch that, but I want to give you a few ways that you can connect with it as well here. So one way that we can connect with archetypes, and I'll recap a little bit, is we learn about them. We read books like this, Women Who Run with the Wolves. Michaela Boehm has a beautiful book, The Wild Woman's Way. So we read about it, learning about the archetype. We can uncover, myths about Lilith and just see how they resonate, because myths and fairy tales and stories, they work at a deeper level than just kind of our intellectual mind, our prefrontal cortex. It's almost they work like at a bone level, but they work on our psyche. So just reading them and just seeing how that feels. But the archetypes I like to think of, there is that intellectual part where we need to learn about them, we need to understand them, but then we also need to embody them. And this is where it can get really fun. So it's playing around with it. So spend some time thinking, what does your inner wild woman look like? What does she wear? Does she wear her hair a certain way? Does she wear certain clothes? Does she wear certain earrings? How does she look? And then what does she like to do? Does she like to garden? Does she like to spend all day making love or painting? What are the things, and it's going to be different for all of us, and that's okay, because the archetypes, they're going to embody differently in each of us. But once you understand a little bit of the archetype, consider, what does she like to do? Is she walking outside barefoot? Is she howling at the moon? And what are your preferences? Remember, the wild woman archetype is about boundaries. What are the things that you like, that you want to say yes to? What are the things that you want to say no to? So we start to step into, embody these archetypes by acting like them, by also dialoguing with them. One of the favorite things I like to do as part of my archetypal work, if there's an archetype I'm trying to bring online, bring to life a little more, when I'm taking a bath in the evening, I spend time thinking about, okay, what does this aspect of myself want? How does she act? How does she behave? How does she move throughout the world? So remember, these are all different aspects of you. So you're like a diamond with all of these different facets. So you have a wild woman, but you also have a lover, a creatrix, a warrior, and they want to come out. They want to come online. We just have to start recognizing them, start engaging with them. So for the wild woman, again, thinking about your preferences. What do you want to say no to? What do you want to say yes to? Getting out in nature, acting a little bit wild. Maybe it's, running around barefoot or howling at the moon. Gathering with your sisters too. So today is a full moon, happy full moon. So this is a beautiful time to gather with your sisters, doing rituals. So there's really so many, getting in touch with your sensuality. What feels good to you? What's turning you on? What's lighting you up? These are all ways that you can start to connect with the wild woman archetype. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, you can let me know in the comments. Again, I have the other talk about how to connect with archetypes. I also have a special gift too. I just created, it's a Wild and Witchy reading list where I have 25 books that I have read and hand selected that will help you reconnect with the divine feminine, so you can live with more clarity, synchronicity, and magic. And the link to get that reading list is right in my bio, so definitely check that out. I think you will find it very inspiring, and thank you for your time, your attention. I would love to hear what the wild woman archetype means to you, as well as what you do to connect with that aspect of yourself. And do you feel that aspect of yourself is online, or do you feel that it's gone dormant for a while? So let me know, and let's continue the conversation.